Hey guys, this is 97 Lego Maniac. Be sure to check out my other social media accounts and my Patreon. Links are down below. Two years I've worked on this project, and now it is finally done. This would have been up a year ago, but few people haven't finished their part on time, so I had to delay this. I was going to upload this maybe a few months after, but it was delayed for so long that I ended up postponing it for another year. At first, I started on Batman near late 2015, and I finished him in 2016. I was going to make a video on just Batman before Brick Fair, but that was when I had the idea to make all the major characters in the Dark Knight trilogy and have a few of my friends to sculpt some parts for me. This video is specifically uploaded on January 22nd, 2018, because 10 years ago, Heath Ledger, who played the Joker, sadly passed away. And this video is made to honor his memory, as well as celebrate the 10th year The Dark Knight was released. One of the greatest superhero movies ever in history. Before I continue, I want to give shoutouts to my friends who made this possible. Detriotika, Affliction, JSparkySteel, Delta Customs, and TheLostMinifig. They were the people who I collaborated with to make this possible, so please go check them out. On to the video. Batman was made around 2015 and I finished him a few months later. He is currently my second version of the Dark Knight Batman and probably the oldest figure I made that I never showcased till now. His cowl is Lego's official cowl piece, with the sides sanded off to make it look like it's a bit tighter around his head. I then painted eyes and mouth, and I think it captured Christian Bale's likeness very well, unlike my mask version, which didn't really capture that as much as I wanted to. His armor around his torso, arms, and legs are all sculpted with Procreate. I sculpted layers of armor onto his torso to give it a tactical look, and I painted it black, gunmetal, and gloss black to make certain pieces stand out. I had to paint a gray outline around his sculpted bat icon to make sure that it stands out clearly. His belt took me days to sculpt and took at least maybe 4 layers of clay because I want to pack as many details as I can, and it is definitely time consuming. The gold paint unfortunately covered a lot of details, so it doesn't really stand out as much as I wanted to. His blade gauntlets are made using Brick Warrior's van braces, and I cut out the blades using the dried Procreate method. Alfred was pretty tricky to get right, and it's mostly his hair. I used the Mr. Incredible hairpiece and sanded off and sculpted in certain sections to try to make it look like his hair almost as accurate as I can get. His head is a standard Bruce Wayne / Loki head with some wrinkles painted on. His collar and tie are all sculpted, and I used my own fabric to make his suit. For accessory, I just gave him a glass. Lucius Fox is simple. I used a thin hairpiece and painted his face to capture the likeness to Morgan Freeman. I used fabric for his tie and jacket, and I painted his torso. For accessories, I gave him a cell phone so he can play Pokemon Go in 2008. Commissioner Gordon utilizes a dog trainer hairpiece because it was the closest thing that I have. Currently, that's almost accurate. His head is actually from an official Dark Knight Rises Lego Gordon figure because I think Lego did a good job capturing Gary Oldman's likeness. I based this version of Gordon based on the rooftop scenes during the beginning of the third movie where he met John Blake. I sculpted his tie and glued fabric for his vest and gave him a brown trench coat that I made myself. For accessories, I gave him a blue folder and a gun. John Blake is probably one of my favorite figures I've made for this video. Starting off with the head, I used the Star Wars Resistance Trooper head and a sanded down Widow's Peak hairpiece. I then made his police uniform and coat out of fabric. For his belt, originally I wanted Josiah, aka Brixalive or Brick Affliction, to make his accessories, but he didn't have the time for commissions, so I had to make something else that is simple and it wouldn't take too long. I used E-tape for the base and I sculpted all his pouches. For his walkie-talkie, I used a circular section of the Lego antenna piece and I glued threads to connect it with a pouch. His walkie-talkie is actually removable by using the white putty of Procreate. For accessories, I gave him a Brick Arms pistol. Talia didn't really take me that long to make. I gave her a generic ponytail hairpiece and I fully painted her face. I then filed a Lego torso and wrapped it with fabric. Believe it or not, Talia was actually my very first figure to incorporate a curved torso with fabric wrapped around it. It's just that I never made any preview photos of her. Her belt is all made with E-tape with some painted details. For accessories, I gave her a knife, which she used to stab Batman, and the bomb detonator. Ra's al Ghul is one of my favorites I've made. After sculpting Logan's beard, I went into a sculpt one for Ra's as well. I used the dog trainer hair once again because it's the closest thing I have. His face is also fully painted as well. His torso has a fabric collar and tie, and I gave him a removable scarf, much like my Star-Lord figure. I then used a Kate Manus trench coat to finish it off. His sword cane is one of my favorite accessories, and I learned from my Neo figure while making it. I used a flex tube for the sheath and made the actual sword with the cut up rod piece, the ball part of the Lego antenna piece, and the metal wire and glued them all together. At first, I was planning on making his League of Shadows look in the beginning of Batman Begins, but I went with the appearance based on the end of the movie instead because that was the suit he wore when he revealed himself as the true Ra's. Lastly, before I move on to the collaborative figures, here's Rachel! And she is very difficult to explain the process of making this figure, so I'll have to make a separate video on her in the future. Just look at the detail. You can obviously tell that this is the most difficult figures for me to make since Invisible Woman back in 2015. Scarecrow is a collaborative figure between me and JSparkySteel. His mask was sculpted entirely by Jason. Originally, he wanted to make it out of fabric, but it didn't work the way he wanted. What I really appreciate and I did not expect is that he was able to make his mask removable in 2 separate pieces. I then painted it and glued threads to finish it off. The rest were made by me. I sculpted his tie and made his suit out of fabric. I made his straitjacket out of fabric from Cape Madness with some modification. His head is all fully painted and I only had the Anakin Skywalker hairpiece available. What's great about this figure is that I can display him with or without his trench coat, so I can recreate his scene near the end of Batman Begins, just minus the horse, or just have him in a regular suit with a mask on like throughout the majority of the first movie and briefly in The Dark Knight. Two-Face is one of my favorite customs and is all thanks to Delta Customs. After seeing his amazing Two-Face sculpt from the Arkham series, I asked him if he could sculpt me another head but for the Nolanverse version. He sculpted the basic shape of the head and I finished the rest, mostly the top section. I then cut half of a Han Solo hairpiece and I glued it onto his head. The rest is fully painted. His tie, collar, and suit are all made with fabric, and I made his gun using Brick Arm's revolver with a handle cut off and replaced it with a brown Lego rod. His coin was made simply by cutting a piece of the chrome harpoon piece and I painted black on one side. Catwoman is a collaborative work between me and Brick Affliction. He sculpted her goggles that she wore in the film. I then painted her face and I completed the rest of the figure. I sanded curves on her torso and used E-tape for her belt and boots. Rest is fully painted and I sculpted pouches. For accessories, I gave her a standard pistol. This is actually the second Catwoman I've made. I made the exact same replica for Josiah for payment for his work. Bain is the most complicated collaborative figure in this video since it was all done by 3 people. The vest was actually provided by Brick Affliction back in 2016. My buddy Detriotika then modified the vest and added some additional sculpting on the vest. Not only that, but he also sculpted the mask, his gauntlet, and his legs. All I sculpted on are the hoses on the mask, the lacings on his back, and his belt on the leg assembly. Detriotika sanded the stud off of his head since we don't want to make the mask removable. I provided E-tape for his belt and sides of the torso, and fully painted everything. I also extended his leg assembly just a bit, like what I did for my Drax figure, so that way he doesn't look small compared to the rest of the figures. The Bank Robber Joker was a collaboration between me and TheLostMinifig. James was kind enough to lend me his Bank Robber Joker mask, which he sculpted on top of a custom Lego ski mask. I then sanded off the bottom section and I carved the back out entirely so I can sculpt hair on the back. His suit is all fully painted, dot for dot, line after line. I then used a modified Cape Madness trench coat and I made his collar out of E-tape. For accessories, I gave him a fully custom bag filled with Brick Arms grenades, which I made with fabric, Procreate, and E-tape. Another accessory I gave is a gun. What I like about the mask is that you can remove it and the hair is actually attached to the head. That way, if I want to display him unmasked, I can use my standard Joker head and have him hold the mask by itself. The head with the sculpted hair is just an alternative head only meant when the mask is worn. Finally, the last minifigure in this video is the Joker himself. This minifigure was a collaboration between me and JSparkySteel. Originally, I wanted Jerkfix to sculpt his hair, but he didn't have the time, so instead, he sketched out the idea and Jason volunteered to make it possible. His head is all fully painted and James was able to make his hair removable, which again, I am super impressed. I then made his suit out of fabric for his undershirt, tie, and collar. His gray jacket and purple trench coat are all from Cape Madness with some modification and painted. His chin is from Michaels, and credit for the idea goes to my buddy Dylan, aka the Moose Fix. What makes this figure great is the abundance of accessories. I gave him a submachine gun during the truck chase scene, a standard pistol as always, a pocket knife. One of my favorite accessories includes a pencil which I made using a Lego rod piece and Procreate, and lastly, I gave him grenades to recreate that scene with the mob bosses. I also painted an extra pair of arms so I can display the figure to recreate the interrogation scene. The dots on the arm and the back of the figure were all randomized, so there is no pattern, really. The bat pod is all built by me and could seat a minifigure. The proportions are a bit off, but I have to match the size of the bike frame with the tires since They're the exact same ones I used for the Tumbler. It has full articulation and it's relatively a simple build overall. The Tumbler was built during the fall semester of last year. I first designed this on LDD before ordering the pieces I need to complete this. This version of the Tumbler is entirely my design. It has steering, articulations, and the hood can open to seat 2 minifigures inside. Nothing much to say other than that this build is probably one of the favorites I've made. That is all, and finally after 2 years I managed to complete this video and check that off my list. I know many of you guys have been waiting for the Dark Knight Trilogy video since I've talked about it for a very long time. In fact, maybe many of you probably forgot it like Ross's Enchantress figure. You guys love to make Disco Suit a meme even up to this date, but somehow forgot about his Enchantress figure, haven't you? Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this video and I hope I don't spend another 2 years or longer on a project in the future. Who knows, that'll probably happen again, maybe for future Star Wars or Infinity War at this point. Making these figures from the Dark Knight Trilogy was a lot of fun, and it reminded me the time DC actually made good movies. Nowadays, we aren't getting great films from DC, with the exception of the Lego Batman movie. Man of Steel was meh, Batman v Superman was boring, Suicide Squad was incompetent, Wonder Woman was kinda disappointing, and Justice League sucked ass. It really is a shame that Warner Brothers, who has the right for every single character in DC, couldn't make a team of directors or have someone in charge to treat these great characters with enough time and respect. What Nolan did, he changed the superhero genre and actually made a competent movie with amazing characters, great cinematography, story, soundtrack, and worked with talented actors. We don't have a director like that in DC anymore. Someone who has a vision to make a coherent storyline that not only stays true to the character's core, but also just make a damn good movie. Now, I will admit, because Nolan made his universe too realistic, it doesn't seem that natural to have Superman show up with Christian Bale's Batman. Nolan is the filmmaker DC deserves, but probably not the one it needs right now for the DCEU. I'm sure there is a filmmaker out there who actually cares about DC and wants to make a good movie, just like the Dark Knight Trilogy, but this time a shared universe. One day, a filmmaker will rise from the ashes of the DCEU and install hope for the comic book fans. Who knows, he's probably like a silent guardian, a watchful protector, a dark knight.